Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Schubert, and I'm here with a good friend of mine to do our first debate for this channel. And right now, it's going to be just like a monthly debate, and I am, of course, the chair, founder, and creative director of Amending America, an educational nonprofit which is curating curriculum and designing educational resources for people who are interested in learning more about American history and civics and law and legal studies. And so we're going to have these monthly debates just to engage more with our audience and challenge our beliefs. And it's also great fun. So let's have fun during this debate. And so, Evan, if you'd like to introduce yourself and state the motion of this debate.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark, for having me. My name is Evan. I am just, I don't know, Mark and I have known each other for a while since we were both in college. And since long before I was in college or in high school, since I can remember, I've been extremely passionate about civics and how we can live out our civic duty and make sure that we are doing everything we can to participate in and enrich our communities and our nation to continue to have a free, flourishing, and healthy society. Uh, to that end, I'm a board member here on Amending America, and I try to impress upon people the importance of civic education and an enthusiasm for history and historiography. Uh, yeah, that's me. And for everyone wondering what topic we're going to be debating, we're going to be going over the following motion. There should be a policy rendering anyone above retirement age, for the purposes of the debate, we're going to have it be 65, rendering anyone above that age ineligible for any elected office in the United States. Mark is going to be debating in favor of such a policy, so for the affirmative, and I will be debating against instituting a policy like that, so for the negative or for the opposition.
All right, awesome. Well, I'm going to go straight into the opening statement for the motion. And so I believe that there should be an age limit, just as there is an age requirement. There should also be an age limit to who can hold elected public office in specifically the federal government, so like president and also Congress, so Senate and House of Representatives. And for the motion, we set it at retirement age, which is 65. And so my main argument is this: people of an older generation have a different life experience, different understanding, and have a different view of the world that we live in today that is impacting especially younger generations, or that will impact the future generations. And a lot of them, a lot of the elderly people tend to think of the world how they remember it when they were growing up, when they were younger, and try to impose that worldview and that understanding of how the world works onto politics today, impacting the current world. And so you might have different people, um, elderly people in positions of power who might not be concerned about the environment, since when they were younger, people weren't as concerned about the environment. You might have people who have different views when it comes to politics, when it comes to religion or cultural issues, how people understand civics and civic engagement and the expectations that our society has of our government. All these things can be different from one generation to the next. And no one generation should have the power, the authority, to impose their worldview onto the current or next generations who are growing up. So, for example, since 1993 until what will be 2029, so in a couple years from now, so almost 40 years, the president will have been someone, for the most part, who was born in the 1940s. So Clinton, Bush Jr., not Obama, he was born in the 60s. He's the exception. Trump and Biden, they were all, except for Obama, all of them were born within like a year of each other in the 40s, the mid to late 40s. They are the boomer generations, like 45 and 46 was when they were born. And so that generation, a single generation, has been governing our country and is still governing our country for 40 years. That's two generations if we define a generation as 20 years. So one generation has the executive authority for two generations worth of time. And this should not be the case. You also have issues when it comes to, the main issues of the day and how we understand these issues. A lot of people, especially younger people, believe that the environment is a very serious concern because it's going to get worse by the time we're older, by the time we're, in our midlife. Evan and I were in our mid 20s now, and what's the environment going to look like in 20 years? Well, someone who's 80 years old right now is probably not going to care what the environment is going to look like in 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. And so what people care about, the issues that people care about, can also change from one generation to the next. You also have, on top of the political power, you have the wealth aspect of it. The boomer generation, the people born in the mid to late 40s and 50s, up to the early 60s, they also control, or own, I should say, most of our country's wealth. So not only do they have the political power, but they also have the economic power as well. A single generation has that much power for multiple generations of time is a pretty serious problem. And we have a lot of economic problems. Older or younger people are not able to find the same kinds of careers, even like simple careers. Back when the boomers were starting out, they can be a teacher or an electrician and be able to pay for a single home, multiple cars, have a family, put their children through school. And now our generation, we barely have enough money from decent jobs to pay for rent. And so you have the political side and then also the economic side. And when it comes to politics, those two things are obviously interacting with each other. And so if you have the older folk, the boomers, for example, holding most of the country's wealth, they're obviously going to influence politics in order to benefit themselves versus the policies that would be needed for younger people to have the opportunities that they need to start a family, to have a home, to have a car, to have insurance, to pay for their education and whatnot. So you have this overlap of political and economic power that, even though there's interaction between the two, they're both being owned and controlled by the same generation, for the most part, the same generation of people. And so I want to break this up, not the economic power. I'm not advocating that we seize the assets of the elderly. We'll leave them the economic power. But when it comes to political power, they should not have both. The elderly folk, people above the retirement age, they should be retiring, not starting their political careers or continuing their political careers for another generation beyond 65. You have people who are now 85 in office in Congress. So that's another generation beyond retirement age. And so there's many issues that I have and that this motion is trying to address. And then my last argument before I hand it over to Evan is that when you have younger people who can then have the experience of governing, because right now it's been the same generation for the most part. Obama's the exception, but it's been the same generation who's been governing us for almost 40 years. That's not giving other generations the experience that they're going to need to properly govern this country. So after this generation's gone, you're going to have a less experienced generation to step up than the current generation. That's the boomer generation. And so we want younger people to have more experience when it comes to very serious things like governing the country. And again, this motion only applies to holding office. This does not apply to voting. So older people are still going to be able to vote, and older people make up the largest voting block. And so this will mean that younger people will have to be impressive enough and get the respect of the older people. So older people are still going to have some say, a lot of say, on our politics, but it's not going to be direct one-to-one power over politics and power and ownership over capital. So that's the end of my opening statement, and I'll hand it off to Evan.
All right, Mark, thank you for a comprehensive and articulate opening statement. So, my first argument against this motion, and I'm going to make three, so this is the first one of those three, is that I would hazard, before this debate, this was what I had in mind, and Mark, you confirmed it, that the institution of an age limit policy like the one that we're going over in this motion would be meant to address systemic problems when it comes to elected officials. Notably, I think most people will think of presidents or congresspeople who were born while we were still at war with Nazi Germany and are still somehow in public service. Joe Biden, before he terminated his run for re-election, Dianne Feinstein, et cetera, et cetera. And that's fair. I think people are seeing a lot of negative symptoms as a result of the fact that we have a lot of people from that generation or of that age in office. But there are many different solutions to those sorts of systemic problems. And of all of those solutions, a strict age limit policy like the one that we're going over is probably the worst. We could, for example, put restrictions on lobbying and just getting money out of politics more broadly. We could instead make it so that certain people running for election would be rendered ineligible based on mental ability or cognitive ability. Like the instances that we see that are really absurd, like people falling asleep at the podium or slurring their words or misremembering dates and names. Those are cognitive symptoms for something like Alzheimer's or dementia or some other neurodegenerative condition. And while obviously they tend to be more common in people who are older, it's possible for someone to have a condition like that when they're younger. So it would be more sensible, kind of like in the private sector, how there are limitations on age based on strict job qualification ability. Those are based off of, do you have any mental or physical inhibitions that would restrict you from being able to do the best job you can? And we can legislate around those rather than around an age, whether it's 55 or 45 or 65 or 75 or 85, no matter what number we choose, ultimately that's going to be an arbitrary number. Whereas you could go with a different alternative, like the ones that I've suggested, where it's getting to the root of the issue in a more acute and definitive manner than just, well, you're 65, so that we can make several assumptions based on your age, and therefore you are not eligible to run for public office. So that's my first argument, is that there are many other ways to solve the problems, Mark, that you identified that I would consider much better and less discriminatory than an age limit. Argument number two, it leaves, even if we were to go with the age limit policy, the systemic issues that it would purport to solve are still largely unaddressed. So the same problems that you mentioned and then I mentioned, dementia or other cognitive deficiencies, there being conflicts of interest regarding wealth, there being a lack of desire to consider the long-term consequences for certain actions or legislation. All of that is still going to be a thing, even if we blanketly institute this policy for elected officials, because it doesn't touch unelected officials, appointed officials, like I'm mainly thinking of Supreme Court justices, for example, and it does nothing for the sources of legacy wealth that are muddying interests or warping healthy incentives in American civics. So the old money elites, the stereotypical Vanderbilt billionaires, the technocrats, who the people who are lobbying for increasing automation and surveillance. All of those people, many of whom on the technocrat side at least are quite young, at least much younger than 65. That's all going to still be a thing, even if we were to go through with the age limit policy. And my third argument is on an individual basis, because for this to not be discriminatory, for it to be both fair for the people instituting it and the people affected by it, it would have to make sense on an individual basis. And on an individual basis, age doesn't dictate ability, and it doesn't dictate worldview either. For example, someone who would be rendered ineligible for at least the presidency, according to this policy, would be Ronald Reagan. And you could criticize Ronald Reagan for a number of valid reasons, but he's one of the few presidents that I could think of in the last century who was, at least during his term, respected or even beloved in a bipartisan fashion. And there are multiple presidents that you could point to in the last century who were like that, but not many. And one of them was Reagan, who was 69 when he was elected, famously saying that he didn't want to discriminate against his opponent based on his youth and inexperience. And conversely, some of the worst presidents, at least in my humble opinion, like Woodrow Wilson or Andrew Johnson, who bungled the peace of World War I and Reconstruction, they were younger than 65 when they were elected to office. And that kind of speaks for itself in the sense that you're not going to be, in my opinion, meaningfully limiting policy-based incompetence if you scrutinize based on age for the office of president, because you're still going to get bad presidents who are younger and good presidents who will be older. And the second part of that argument, as it relates to worldview, Reagan famously, your sort of dyed-in-the-wool, I guess, neoconservative, anti-union, and then you have someone like Biden, who you can, again, many reasons to, in good faith, criticize Biden both when he was a senator and when he was president, but famously pro-union, pro-working class, anti-war, at least he can claim to be anti-war. We can debate about whether or not he was. But the on-paper advertised platforms of people within the same generation are different, and you can point to multiple instances of that. And generationally, if we're not talking about specific tangible examples of elected officials, it was the baby boomers who were famously extraordinarily anti-war especially during the war in Vietnam. And it was people in that generation who were also famously participating in things like um, religious revivals and the sexual revolution. The boomers are an extremely diverse politically group of people. So to say that uh, there's uh, a worldview based monopoly in Congress right now because everybody is above a certain age, I don't know if that really stands because uh, when boomers were our age or not that much older, they ran the gambit on political and cultural worldviews, just like Generation Z runs the gambit on political and social worldviews today. So, just to sum, those are my three main arguments that an age limit policy like the one we're discussing is probably the worst out of several different options to address the problems that Mark and I both agree on. Two, those systemic problems, even if you did go through with the age limit policy, would be largely unaddressed, namely on the unelected officials side. And then three, on an individual basis, you're going to find exceptions all over the place in terms of both worldview and ability when it comes to people who are above or below a certain age.
All right, awesome. So now we begin the rebuttal stage, and I just want to address your last point first, and that is the uh, point that you made about the boomer generation. Yeah, the boomer generation were very diverse. They were anti-war when it was them who were being drafted, but they are definitely not anti-war when they became the politicians and the presidents. If you look at Clinton all the way to Trump today, we were constantly getting ourselves into conflicts that have literally nothing to do with the United States. You know, Bosnia and Serbia had nothing to do with the United States under Clinton. You have the war on terror under Bush Jr. and Obama. A lot of that had very little to do with the actual systemic issue of the United States. There's the 9/11, but that wasn't the beginning of our involvement in the Middle East. That was a consequence of our involvement in the Middle East. And then you have Trump and Biden, who also were, continuing that policy. So yeah, they were the whole generation might have been diverse, but the whole generation isn't the ones who holding office. It's a few select people within that generation. But everyone in that same generation, all the presidents and most of the politicians, pretty much have the same worldview. Even though their fellow members of that generation who are not in politics might have differing views, the same generation within politics tend to have the same worldview and the same policies and the same platforms, or at least similar enough when it comes to important issues. One might care about infrastructure more than energy production or whatever, so the minutia might be different, but the overall policies are pretty much the same. I mean, it was Clinton who said that he wanted to be the small government president during his campaign in '92, and so that's a very similar sentiment to most of the boomer generation within politics. Even though they say they wanted small government, they actually got bigger government with more regulations and stuff like that. So, yeah, I agree with you that the um, a generation can have many different facets and a diversity of opinion. But when we're looking at who actually holds office within the same generation, they hold very similar views. And then let's see, you bring up a good argument for another topic that I think we should debate in the future, which the Romans called the cursus honorum, the course or path of honor. And the Latin definition of the word honor is the worthiness to govern, so the right to hold office. And so this is something that I think you and I can can both agree on and debate in the future. But you know, we believe in people should have experience and prove themselves before they hold office, and that doesn't really have anything to do with age necessarily, or at least not directly. You can have a young person who is very smart and very experienced, and you can have someone who is older, who took longer to get that experience and that knowledge before they can govern. And that's true. However, that doesn't really address the motion that we're talking about today, even though that's something that we can both agree on. And then, let's see, your second argument about systemic issues continuing to exist. Well, I mean, that's kind of like the definition of systemic. It's a broader system that we live in, and we would have to change more than just the age limit in order to address that. Systemic is not something that you change with a single policy. Systemic will change requires, or systemic issues require systemic changes. And I think that the age issue is just one widget within the system, but it is still in itself a good policy, even though the system, if you just change that one policy, the system might still look relatively similar to what we have today. There would be difference when it comes to who's holding office and what the younger politicians care about will be different from what older politicians have kind of settled into. The kind of careerism of the older generations, the issues that they care about, which could be backed by lobbying. It might not be backed by lobbying. It could just be a philosophical thing that the individual politician has. But either way, if it's a true conviction, which I doubt many politicians have true conviction, or if it's just lobbying effort, that to have older people, beyond retirement age, that's when I say older people, that's who I'm talking about, and having them hold office is, I think, in itself part of the problem. It's not an it's not something that could be good or could be bad. I think it's just bad. It is because again, with one of my first arguments is no one generation should control the country for multiple generations worth of time. And even if you have a good leader, you also have bad leaders who are older. You have Reagan, who was 69 when he was, I think that was for his second term, going into his second term. And so you have him in his 60s still. And then you have people like Trump and Biden, who are in their 70s and 80s going in and staying in politics. So even though people were making a big deal, and it was the boomer generation in the 80s who were making a big deal about Reagan being too old when he was in the 60s, and now the boomer generation are in their 70s and 80s, and they're like, oh, you shouldn't care about age, And so I think it's kind of hypocritical when it comes to the issues. And again, that's kind of to my point. It's like the issues that one generation cares about can differ from the next generation. And even within a single generation, they might change their views just to hold power. And so it was the boomers who were complaining about Reagan being too old, and now the boomers are even older than Reagan, but they don't want anyone, discriminating against them for their age. And so they're really just there to hold power. Their main argument, not yours, but theirs, main argument is we want to hold power, and we're going to change the game of politics in order to maintain that power. And I believe in having strict rules that allow more people to play the game, to participate in politics. And one of those rules has to be a age limit as well as an age requirement. I mean, you talked about discrimination. Is it not discrimination then to have an age requirement? What if there's an 18-year-old who has an IQ of 210 and who can solve all of our political issues and our financial issues, but they can't hold office because they're only 18. Is an age requirement, is that not discrimination? And how can we tolerate that kind of discrimination? But then when we look at age limit at the other end of the age spectrum, we seem to view that as, going too far. It's discrimination that's going too far. I don't really see the consistency between having a age requirement but then no age limit. And one of your arguments was talking about the cognition, the health, the mental health of the individual politicians. I mean, I support having cognitive tests of any age to hold any office. That's something that doesn't have to just be applied to older folk. It could also be applied to younger politicians, and I would still want that policy. And so we can both agree and have that on top of the age limit as well. Same thing with the experience. We want people who have experience who get into office, not people without any experience. I mean, Trump, he's the first president that we've had who didn't have a single second of public office before becoming president. And so that to me is an issue, but that's a separate issue to what our motion is dealing with. And you mentioned it, how you can have these generalizations for an age group. So like older people generally have more cognitive issues, whether that be memory issues like Alzheimer's, whether that be physical issues that can affect their health or their mental state. And that is something that is true, and it is more across the board. But obviously you have certain individuals who are older, who are healthy, who are mentally healthy, who are physically healthy. And so this motion doesn't really address the healthiness of the older generation and whether or not they are healthy or mentally cognitive to hold office. Even if they are mentally cognitive to hold office, this does not mean that they have a grasp of the issues that face the current or previous or younger generations today. So you can have a very healthy minded person who is 90 years old, who is president or senator or a member of the House, who has no contact with younger people, who still thinks worrying about Russia, from the Cold War, or China from the Cold War, is our number one issue today, when many Americans can't afford a home, when many Americans can't start a family, when many Americans can, have to go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt just to get a decent education, or have issues finding jobs for, unemployment. And so the issues that are facing younger people are different from the issues that older people care about. And that's one of the main problems with having older people in office and not letting younger people, giving them the reins. Again, these people, they can hold office before they reach retirement age, and they'll have their time. They'll have decades from 25 when you can run for a House, or 30 for Senate and 35 for president. If you run for president at 35, you have 30 years to run for president or to be president within that time period. That's, to me, plenty of time to run for president and to be president for 4 or 8 years, rather than having to wait for someone is in their 60s and then they start running for office. That to me is a pretty that's part of the rub. That's part of the issue that we have. Again, it's the one generation holding power for multiple generations, and this will impact the experience that the current generation growing up. They won't have the same opportunities because it's being held by the older generation. The younger generation won't have the same opportunities to hold office, to practice their governance and whatnot. And again, for this motion, it's just to hold office. So younger people who are holding the office, they can still appoint older advisors. So the elderly people, and again, elderly means above the age of 65, so it's not like 100 years old. Um, the elderly people, the retirees, can still, give their voice to politics, to political issues, to give their advice and their expertise to the next generation who is holding office. So all the benefits of having that experience can still be applied under the system, just not directly being applied by a single generation. So that's my rebuttal.
All right. Thank you, Mark. So there were some things in your opening statement that I wanted to touch on, but I wanted to keep my opening statement, and then leave rebuttal for that. So in terms of your main arguments, I have them here as the young and the old have fundamentally different worldviews, and that currently there's one particular generation that has had a monopoly in elected office for a while, and that's bad. And it is bad because these older people will place less value on consequences that will outlive them, that since they're in a different phase of life, they have experienced different things and remember different things, and are not necessarily going to have the ability to empathize with younger constituents. And finally, that due to any variety or combination of political or socioeconomic advantages that these people had when they were our age, not only do they kind of have a monopoly on office, but they also have a disproportionate influence in terms of wealth and power, and they're being a bit too stingy with it, and that's also creating negative consequences. So, with all of that in mind, I'm going to touch on the old and young have fundamentally different worldviews. Related to that, you offered some rebuttal to me, essentially saying that boomers have become very politically homogenous to their and probably our detriment in their old age. But frankly, that argument is going to be a wash in the long run, because we're going to become more politically homogenous in our old age. So it's not like instituting an age limit is going to meaningfully fix that. I mean, as long as there's going to be any fluctuation of birth rate where one generation is going to be larger or smaller proportionate to others, then there being phases of our country's history where a lot of people of a particular generation are going to have more butts in seats in the Senate and the House and the Supreme Court and the presidency. That's going to be a persistent issue, at least on the basis of age, forever, pretty much. Not unless we institute some sort of dystopian population control, which falls way outside of our motion, and I think we both agree that would probably be quite bad. So that's what I have to say on your first argument. And something else that you said that is something that I really want to touch on in my rebuttal. You mentioned that systemic issues will require system level changes. And so it's not like this one policy is going to fix everything, or that it should be expected to just on its own fundamentally ease or shift the symptoms of those systemic issues. And something as well that's related to that you mentioned is that let me see here. that there are still benefits to people uh, who are elderly holding office, and that can be uh, lived out through them being appointed officials, older advisors, elder statesmen. So if it's still good sometimes for older people to have office, and it's uh, not reasonable to say that this one thing is going to change the status quo on its own, then what exactly is it accomplishing? And that just relates back to my original argument that I gave in my opening statement, which is that it's still going to leave systemic issues, I would say, irresponsibly unaddressed, even if you were to go through with it, because I'm not sure how you can acknowledge the benefits of officials in office if they're unelected and then instead appointed by younger people, yet still say that it's detrimental enough to institute an age limit for them to be older and also elected officials. Uh, yeah, that I just am having trouble squaring that. And then I think the final bit of rebuttal that I'll add is the the vision that this motion is selling is that if we institute this policy, then uh, someday soon, in an appreciable number of years within our lifetime, we're going to see people who are young and more attuned to the plights of their own generation and people um, within a generous age neighborhood, that there are going to be lots of young people in office who are uh, hip and savvy and more understanding of and more lucid of the world that we currently live in, people who are going to have more pepper in their hair instead of salt, and that these old timers who are selfish and power hungry are going to fade away, and their negative influence is not going to hinder public progress as much, if not at all. Uh, and to that, I would say, as long as there are any number of issues related to age, but not age, like the concentration of wealth, like there being no term limits, at least for being a senator, for example. Uh, and as long as there are still going to be these so called global elites and unelected officials, then you are always going to have those warped incentives. There are people who are well below the age of 65 who are very wealthy and in favor of us getting involved in foreign conflicts that are none of our business, who are enriched by Americans being invasively surveilled or tracked for putting people in AI adjacent positions like copywriters or artists out of work in order for people to pay money for tokens for tools that do those things. As long as any of that is going to be a thing, then we're still going to see the same issues, and this motion won't have accomplished anything. Whereas you could address those issues in a meaningful way through multiple different avenues other than age, like term limits, like cognitive tests, like restrictions on lobbying and getting money out of politics. So that's my rebuttal. Yeah.
Awesome. Now we go into open inquiry. And I think for this section, what we should do is like one of us asks a question, you answer, and then you ask a question. So it's a back and forth rather than one person just asking all the questions. Um, and so I'll start with my first question to address the last point that you made in your rebuttal, which is about younger people today who have wealth and positions of power and are still abusing that power and wealth for things that, for policies that you and I disagree with, like mass surveillance or foreign wars. Am I I guess, question slash rebuttal to that would be: would you want those young people today who are participating in that kind of practice to maintain that position and that power for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years? Or would you want there to be an age limit where they no longer have a say, at least when it comes to being to holding office, um, in those practices and in those decisions? So it's like, yeah, there's young people who do bad things, and I don't want them to continue doing bad things for multiple generations longer. I want them to be limited by how long they can do these bad things.
Yeah, that's fair. And I don't have a gotcha response to that. My best response to that is that if they, so to speak, age out of the system, um, that's not going to fundamentally diminish the harmful power that they have, because at least in the examples that I'm thinking of the people who are younger than 65 and are definitely in favor, usually in the name of enriching themselves, of things like foreign wars, mass surveillance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, the that power is derived primarily from wealth, which is the exact same issue with baby boomers, because in the case of specific individuals who are either elected or unelected, just I suppose your classic disgruntled millennial or even Gen Z who is talking about the boomers and how they're uh, harming uh, public life or harming costs of living, and or any number of grievances, intergenerational grievances that people may have. Uh, it's it's primarily because they were able to corner a lot of wealth relative to everyone else, as opposed to a lot of elected offices per se. I think that uh, a lot of them being able to hold elected office to the degree that we see now, even though a lot of them are of or older than retirement age, uh, that's because one, there were a ton of them, and two, they were able to corner a lot of wealth due to the advantages that they had in a post-war economy. So them aging out of the system isn't going to uh, so completely diminish their ability to abuse uh, the system uh, to justify instituting the policy in the first place, I would argue. So now a question that I would pose to you is that uh, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this in the most straightforward manner. How is age, specifically for the motion, so an age limit as opposed to an age minimum, uh, how is that in your mind not discriminatory, considering that it's a fundamentally arbitrary limit as opposed to something that is more tangible, like a cognitive test or conflicts of interest financially or even not financially?
Well, it is a form of discrimination, just like how the age minimum is a form of discrimination. And even these cognitive tests, that's also a form of discriminating. You're discriminating against people based on their cognitive ability. Now, these are, I believe, appropriate forms of discrimination, things that are relative to the issue on hand, as opposed to other forms of intolerable uh, discriminatory practices like on race or gender, which really don't track with cognitive ability or ability to hold office. You know, a black man and a white man can hold office the same way. I mean, Obama, I think, was a better president than many presidents like James Buchanan. And so I mean he was half white, so I guess he has that racial side of him. But I just think it's ridiculous to discriminate people on certain forms of differences, like differences of race and gender. But I think it's perfectly fine to discriminate against people based on the cognitive ability, based on age when it comes to an age minimum. Like again, an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old could be more cognitive than Biden or Trump, but we don't allow them to run for office. And I still think that's a good form of discrimination, despite the fact that they might be a better president. But we don't know that for a fact, and we're not going to take the risk of wide scale allowance of 17-year-olds to run for president. I think when you have to look at the risk of the entire age gap or the age minimum, as you should for the age maximum, where, yeah, you could have some older presidents who are good at their job. Um, you're gonna have trouble finding examples of that. When we look back at history and look at the present, and like, are the older generation really doing a good job at governing the country? Are they really doing a good job? They're doing a good job for themselves. They're enriching themselves more than any other generation before. Even the robber barons, who had had massive economic power and also political power, but they didn't hold office. Vanderbilt didn't hold office. Rockefeller, at least David Rockefeller, the first Rockefeller, he didn't hold office. His grandson did, but that wasn't that successful. And other of the robber baron generation, they didn't hold office for the most part, and they went away after like 20 years because life expectancy was a lot lower than it is today. And that's another point: is we didn't need a life an age maximum in the past because people didn't live that long in the past. People are living way longer than in any point in human history. I mean, the life expectancy when you take out infant mortality in the 1930s was 58 for men, and by 1960s it was still below 60. It was like 59 or maybe 60 for men in 1960s. Now it's 80 or 79, almost 80, and it's going to increase with advancements in health, in technology when it comes to keeping people alive. Now, again, keeping people alive is not keeping them cognitively healthy, and so just because you have people living longer, that doesn't mean that that age range is a healthy age range to be holding power. Just as someone under 25 should not hold power, and that's just for the House of Representatives. You have to be under 30 to hold a Senate seat, and you have to be over 30, and you have to be over 35 to be president. And so those are forms of discrimination based on age, and they're well accepted. There are some people in certain camps, political camps, who want to decrease the age of things like voting and holding office. I disagree with that, but that's not relative or relating to this motion. So yeah, it is a form. To answer your question, it is a form of discrimination, and it is a form of discrimination that we can tolerate, since we tolerate the opposite of it, which is an age minimum. And for the same reason, it's across the board risk to have a 17-year-old hold position of power, as I believe it is across the board a risk for people over the retirement age to hold power. And then, so my follow-up question, not to that point exactly, is the issue of political homogeneity. You argued that in the future, our generation is going to become homogenous politically. There's some, you know, point of concerns where that might not be the case, because at least when it comes to gender ideology, our generation of women are very left, far left, and it's they're becoming more far left, while our generation of men are becoming very far right. This is not something that the boomer generation dealt with. They were all, like, for that time period in the 60s, late 60s and early 70s, before they were able to hold power starting in the late 80s, um, they were pretty much the same. They were against the Vietnam War for the most part. They were against a lot of the policies of, especially Nixon, but also LBJ. And so they, not LBJ, Nixon and Ford, who were conservatives, and even Carter, who was more conservative than what people remember. Um, and so the boomer generation, when they were young, before they held power, they had homogeneity. It wasn't, 100%, obviously, but they were more or less of a certain generation, of a certain mindset in that generation. Our generation, the Gen Zers, were like completely separated, and we haven't even begun to hold office. Like, I'm like the oldest of the Gen Z. I was born in the year 2000. That's like the cutting off point from the millennials to Gen Z. And, I'm 25. I'm not even 26 yet. I will be in a couple of days. Um and I can just barely run for House of Representatives. I can't run for Senate. I can't run for the presidency for another 10 years. And our generation is completely divided, specifically when it comes to gender politics. Um, and so I don't see that homogeneity showing up when we are in our 50s, 30 years from now or something like that, or 60s or 70s or whatever. So I'm not too sure that your argument on homogeneity will be accurate for our generation, but it also doesn't really address the point. So what if our generation becomes homogenous when we're older? Our worldview, whether that be a homogenous worldview or not, should not be the worldview that controls this country for multiple generations on end. Um, and so, even if we do become homogenous amongst ourselves, we most likely will not be homogenous politically with the younger generation, with Gen Alpha or Beta or whatever generation comes next. So even if we do become homogenous, I don't think that really addresses my concern about a single generation holding too much power for a very long time, for multiple generations.
Yeah, that's fair, and I appreciate you bringing that up. But again, in the specific case of the yes, it's very alarming. The data that we're seeing of um, young men, especially, and women, but Gen Z men and Gen Z women are starting to diverge politically. And the main cause of that and the harms that we're seeing there, where there's this problem of faction and there's this ideological tribalism, and uh, one camp in their radical corner, then another camp in their radical corner, and uh, a diminishing potential window of reconciliation, essentially, between those groups, broadly men and women, but just politically in general. I would say the main cause of that, at least when it comes to men staying on or being radicalized further to the right than women are, or men of a different generation, is due to manosphere gurus like Andrew Tate, who is not elected to any office in the United States and hopefully never will be. um, so the issue there, of either tribalism or a monopoly of worldview among any group, whether it be a specific gender or a specific generation, um, is going to persist on the basis of wealth and power rather than age, because as anybody lives life, and as anybody in a politic, because politics used to mean something else. It used to essentially mean the science of people living together, or the philosophy of people living together. As long as people are rewarded and allowed to consolidate wealth and power, and then leverage that wealth and power inordinately for their interests in elected life, or even an unelected life, then you're always going to see problems like that come up, and it is completely age agnostic. Therefore, I fail to see how an age limit would fix that in a profound manner. And with that said, I actually don't have any other follow-up questions for you. So we can either move into what's coming up next, the outro, or is there something else that you had in mind?
Oh, well, I would like to continue having this
Oh,
discussion with
yeah,
you.
sure.
But after this, it would be concluding statements and then the outro.
Well, in that case, yeah, if you have another question, then feel free.
Oh yeah, I mean, we can just go back and forth at this point to address the question that you just gave, which is more concerned about the systemic. I think that was another point that you made earlier, was the systemic issues being unaddressed by this motion. And again, a single policy should not be um, graded or judged on its
Mm,
ability to fix the entire system. Like, Eisenhower's Highway Act didn't fix nuclear tensions with Russia or the Soviet Union. So does that mean that the Highway Act was a bad policy? Like, no, it was a good policy within what it was trying to address, which is infrastructure problems in the country at that time. And so when it comes to the age limit, this is a particular policy trying to address a particular problem, which I think, I mean, you can judge what my best argument was, but I think my best argument, at least to me, is one generation should not control the nation for multiple generations. I think that's my strongest point, and that will be addressed by term limits, or not by term limits. It won't be addressed by term limits. It will be addressed by age limit, and it won't be addressed by term limits because you can have people of the same generation stagger when they join
mm,
office. And so if you have boomers, in their 20s or 30s going into the House of Representatives or going into the Senate or becoming president, and then 10 years later, you have the same generation of boomers who are now in their 30s and 40s, and then they start their office. And then 10 years later, you have the same generation of people who are in their 40s and 50s who then run for office. And then 10 years later, so you will still see the same problem of one generation holding office for multiple generations of time, even with term limits, because the term limit doesn't apply to the entire generation. It applies to individuals. I mean, I support term limits to begin with for individuals, just as I don't believe a single generation should be able to control politics for a very long time. I also believe that individuals should not be able to control or hold office for a specific position for a very long time. So I don't think that term limits will address the generational problems that this motion addresses. Um, so that would be my counter argument to the term limit, like having other forms of discriminatory policy that you find more tolerable besides age, like term limits, which is a form of discriminating, or cognitive tests. We can have these things on top of the age limit, and those things don't necessarily address the generational issue. Like if you have a generation of people who live long and are cognitive, they're still going to hold office. If the cognitive tests are the only tests that you have, they're still going to hold office, and all the problems that come with a single generation holding power for a very long time is still going to be present. So this motion is addressing a particular issue, it shouldn't be judged or graded on how well it addresses other issues, um, at least when it comes to this debate. And so I want to get your response to that.
Uh, my answer to that is going to be kind of spicy. On the basis of cognitive tests and term limits, they're not going to necessarily keep boomers out of office per se, or a specific generation out of office per se. It won't prevent generational monopolies in office per se. But what it can address is if you instituted term limits and cognitive tests, then you would see less tyrants and fewer psychopaths. So people who don't have the mental faculties necessary to withstand the pressures of political office, and people who are so hungry for power that they're willing to latch onto it for multiple consecutive terms in excess of what we would consider reasonable. I'm not sure that an age limit would address that any better than uh, term limits and cognitive tests would, because while those two, to your point, I fully concede this to you, it would not prevent a generational political monopoly. It would prevent the worst people from any given generation, whether it's mine or boomers or millennials or any of them. It would prevent the worst elements from holding office at all, or holding it again and again and again and again and again, to the degree where they can cement a legacy that is harmful to the people who are coming after. So that's my answer to that question. And I actually just now thought of a question that I'd love to hear you weigh in on and opine on. Um, the harms of a generational monopoly on office, just in civics and American civics, period. Um, I I would say that those are true, and that you've identified them um, in a way that I don't take any major issue with. Um, but that said, um, if that's something that you stand by, then the exact same sorts of problems are playing themselves out with the sort of stereotypical unfireable boomer bureaucrat that was elected to their, or not elected, pardon me, appointed to their Department of Agriculture leadership position, or their Department of Interior position, or their Homeland position, or wherever. And they've been there for the last several presidents now. And the people that you never even hear of, who aren't necessarily agency heads but still have a lot of influence and control a lot of federal budget, but were definitely above retirement age and not elected by anybody. If those people are still capable of the same sorts of systemic issues that you have identified in elected officials, then I'm I'm not sure how to cap that off with a specific question, but like, how do you square that basically? How is it nominally okay in that situation to not institute, or to not, for that to not encompass this motion, whereas in an elected position it would be?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent question, and it's definitely a question that I think we can expand this motion to include, which are the appointees.
Mm-hmm.
So, my answer to that would be, if you have younger people who are going into office, they will have the oversight over the appointees
Mm,
of,
fair enough.
and so if there's an appointee who is behaving in a way that our generation finds despicable, that previous generations might have been, negligent on, like insider trading or something like that. That's something that older people don't really care about, but younger people are, constantly talking about, like the Nancy Pelosi stuff like that. And so if we have the reins of power at this moment, when we have this idea, this worldview, then we can make that change, and we can fire appointees who violate our current generation's worldview of what it means to hold public office, whether that be elected or appointed. And so the younger generation will have oversight over the older generation, just as the older generation will have the experience or knowledge that they can then endow through being advisors to the younger generation. The issue is with how we're currently living is no one is giving younger generation the opportunity to get that experience. And the older generation aren't really giving us advice either. They're giving us nothing. They're holding the wealth, they're holding the experience and the opportunities, and they're not advising us, they're not educating us, they're not teaching us anything. They're negligent and derelict in their civic engagement with our generation because they don't have to appeal to us in our generation to hold power. Our generation, especially Gen Z, we are the smallest voting bloc in the entire electorate. They don't care about us, and they're not going to care about us, and they're only going to care about their fellow boomers because the boomer generation is the largest voting bloc by far. And this crosses racial lines, this crosses political party lines. It's a whole generation. That used to be a phrase. They're part of a whole generation, and they are just. I don't see how the current system, without an age limit, is a good system for us to continue. Again, there are other policies that we should adopt. I believe in the cursus honorum. I believe in cognitive tests. I believe in physical tests as well as cognitive. We can have that on top of having an age limit. They're not mutually exclusive, and I agree with you that we should have those other forms of discrimination, um, other forms of requirements before holding office or to maintain their office. So I do believe that this motion can address that generational monopoly. I think that's a good term, or generational oligarchy over politics, when politics is not supposed to be one generation holds everything and never ever gives anyone any opportunities without us fighting for them. Like, no, the next generation is supposed to teach us, advise us, to garner the next generation. But the boomer generation are not garnering us at all. They're they're derelict in their responsibilities, um, and that's part of their worldview. Their philosophy is about them. It's about what they want at that moment. When they were younger, they didn't want us going into wars because it was them being drafted. When they got older and they can't be drafted and they have positions of power, now all of a sudden they want us to be in all these wars. So that worldview, that very self-centered worldview, should not have a monopoly for multiple generations when the next generation, it might be better, it might be worse. We don't know. It might be super duper better, it might be worse. Who knows? But whatever it is, it should be given the opportunity, and although it should be given the opportunity, it shouldn't be given the opportunity to last forever. And so a single worldview should, different worldviews should have the opportunity to hold power, but not forever. And so having this churning of the reins of power is something that an age limit will guarantee, at least when it comes to generational, a churning of generational people who hold office, that other tests that you and I agree with, like cognitive tests, will not address.
Yeah, instead of the unfireable bureaucrats insider trading on the commodities market or on the New York Stock Exchange, they'll be insider trading on Kalshi and Poly Market instead. Um, okay, well, thank you. That was insightful. And yeah, again, I don't have any particular question for you off the top of my head. So if you have any others, then please feel free. I'm an open book. And then if not, then we can keep going and move on.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's all the questions that I had for you, and I think you had all that was all the questions that you had for me. So we
Mm-hmm.
can move on to the concluding statements. And I think the opposition goes first when it comes to
Yep. Yeah,
concluding
that's fine with
statements.
me. I'm happy to go first.
All right.
So uh, the the thing that I really like about the questions that we posed with one another and the answers that we gave uh, are that we are not in a zero sum game. That this policy can certainly exist in tandem with other solutions. But there's a reason why we're debating here today on whether or not there should be an age limit as opposed to whether or not there should be cognitive tests or whether or not there should be term limits. Because we're having this debate in the first place because implicitly uh, that motion, that policy, would be considered a worthy peer to exist in tandem with all of those other policies and is worthy of priority uh, near or above those other solutions as well, even if they can all coexist and serve broadly the same objective. And I'm not persuaded of that because of the things that I mentioned already. That the uh, yes, there are harms to one generation, whether it's boomers or anyone else, um, having a oligarchy or a monopoly over political life longer than their years ought to allow. Uh, I I agree that that's something that we should do something about, but more so than uh, one generation or another being in office longer. The sorts of things that Mark and I both agree are problems that are worth talking about, that are necessary to talk about, uh, that those are, I mean, in a sense, they're inherent to human nature. I don't think there's any amount of legislation you can propose that is going to make it impossible for people who are money hungry and power hungry to mess with politics, but we can make it harder for them to mess with it. And people are always going to try to do that. There are always going to be despots, demagogues, tyrants who are going to want to leverage whatever it is they have, whether it's force or wealth or political influence or friends in high places. Uh, there are always going to be people who will want to do that to the detriment of the polity. And that is age agnostic. So we should be focusing on those things rather than what is tertiary to that, which I would consider age. Uh, and and I hope that if you were on the opposite camp or if you were wavering between the two, that you were enriched by my argumentation accordingly. Take it away, Mark.
Awesome. Thank you. So, when it comes to letting a single generation the reins of power for multiple generations, I think that is the root of the problem that this motion addresses. There are other problems that other policies can address. You have people who are unfit to hold office, and we have tests, and we should have tests to filter them out from being able to hold office, to discriminate against them in the tolerable sense of the word discriminate. But when it comes to a single generation, that has to be across the board. It has to be a policy like this motion. and to prevent one generation from holding power for many generations, for 2 or 3 generations, for a single generation to hold that power for that long. And you have the issues of differing worldviews. You have the issues of self-interest. You have the issues the of these problems that it's human nature to have self-interest. It's human nature to have a certain philosophy. Everyone has a worldview, but we shouldn't let one of these worldviews or one of these self-interests to persist in our government forever. And what we see is the worldview of the boomer generation, at least with how this emotion addresses the problems of today. We see that one generation has had their worldview and their self interest be supreme and oppressive against everyone else for their own self interest, for their own worldview. And even their own worldview is not really consistent. Again, when they were younger, they didn't want to be drafted into Vietnam, but then when they got older, they're like, "Oh, we should, you know, try out, democracy in the Middle East, or Central and South America, or Africa, or Asia, or try to maintain democracy in Europe with all these conflicts and all these wars that have nothing to do with our nation." And more people today of our generation are we have a different worldview. We're against that kind of interventionism more so than they are. And so I don't think that their worldview should continue to have sway over our real politic power. Just as I don't think that our worldview, whenever we do get power in like 30 or 40 years, I don't think that our worldview should last forever either. I'm not that kind of a person who believes that whatever I believe must be true and must be absolute and must be enforced forever. I think that what I believe and what our generation tends to believe is true for us, but it won't be true for the next generation. Just as the previous generation's worldview is not, it might be true for them, but it's not true for us. And so I don't think that one generation should have control for that long. Are there other issues that this motion does not address? This motion, addresses or does not address directly what you call the tertiary side effects, which you think are age. Tertiary to what? Tertiary to cognitive tests, tertiary to experience. Um, Although the age is tertiary to what you brought up, age is not tertiary to what this motion is addressing or what I brought up. Age is very much the you know foreground of this debate and of this policy of this motion. And so I believe, again, I believe that our generation should be given the opportunity, just as the millennial generation and the Gen X generation, they should have been given the opportunities that the boomers had when they were young to start going into politics and to gain that experience before they reach retirement age. I mean, by the time the boomer generation clock out of life in like 10 years from now or something like that, or even probably longer, they're going to be in their 80s and 90s. I mean, a lot of them, the early boomers, are already in their 80s and their mid 80s. And so if they live another 10 years, they're going to be in their 90s, almost 100, before they clock out. And only then will next generations, the Gen Xers and millennials, have the reins of power, and they're going to be in their 60s when they're starting out, just when they now have the power, they're going to be above the retirement age. And I think that's a bad thing. I don't think that the people who run that government should be starting out or to be, just getting into to power, to monopoly of power, after retirement. I don't think that is necessarily a good thing because again, there's that disconnect from the current generation of power with the issues of today. So I don't think that one generation should have power for multiple generations, and I don't think that one worldview should have that kind of power as well. And there's that disconnect from the issues that they care about versus the issues that we care about and will most likely continue to care about for decades to come that we'll have no power to do anything about because we're not given the opportunity to have that power because all the opportunities are sucked up by the one generation or a few generations. So if you're moved by that argument, then support the motion.
All right. So what I'm hearing is that the most stable form of governance that will deliver us into a new age of American prosperity is child emperors, who will be the most stable and long encompassing of any other elected or non-elected official.
Well, again, there's still the age minimum that I believe in, so we won't have child emperors running our government from when they're 10 till when they're 65. That's 55 years, which is longer than what the boomers have been controlling us. Or I mean, it's longer than what the boomers have been controlling us. But again, the boomers are still around,
Yeah.
and they're probably still going to be around for another 10 years, at least, as a major voting bloc. It's going to be 55 years of boomer control of, if not longer, of this country. And I don't think that's healthy. That no generation has ever had that much power for that long. Not the founding generation, they died pretty young. I mean, most of the people who were the top revolutionary leaders died before the turn of that century. Only a handful lived on a couple decades later, and those were the younger people of the founding generation, like the Thomas Jeffersons and the James Madisons of the founding generation. They lived on till 1820, 25, or 26 until 1836 or something like that. Um, and even they didn't have that much power for that long, and they were the founding fathers. They were like the most. I mean, just studying history and civics, the founding generation is by far the smartest, most civically literate, and engaging generation in not just our nation's history, but all of human history. At no point in any country, at any time period, has a whole generation of a people group been that civically engaged than our founding generation. And so we should study that and learn from them. And we can learn more from the founding generation about properly running a government than we will from learning from the boomers. So I don't think that we should put too much. I don't think we should put the boomers on a pedestal simply because they're the ones in power today. Just because you're in power does not mean that you're doing a good job while in power. And so I want that churning of generations, and I do think that the young generation should learn from not just the current generation in power, but previous generations as well. We can learn so much from history, and that's why I encourage everyone to go to our website,
Good plug. Good plug.
www.utopia.us, and learn American history and civics from the founding era all the way up till the modern time. We even go back further than the founding era. We go back to the start of the colonial era in 1492. And so, if you want to learn history and civics, which you're most likely not going to learn from the boomer generation, the ones in power, then go to our website and start studying American history. And so now we can, I guess this is part of the outro. Just stay, I thought this was a good debate. It's been almost hour and a half, and I like to have these debates more often. Do you think you'd do it like once every 2 weeks or something like that?
Maybe not once every 2 weeks, but once a month. Yeah.
Okay, once a month.
if not more. But we'll start off with once a month.
All right, awesome. And yeah, is there any outro stuff that you want to say?
Um, no, I mean the main thing that I would want to do is to just uh, implore people, no matter what side of the aisle you on, or no matter how um, maybe not extreme, but okay, well, yeah, we'll go with extreme. No matter what extremes you fall on certain issues, wherever you're at on gay marriage or abortion or gun control or age limits and things like that. Amending America is probably the most definitive place, at least right now, to online explore the history of these issues and many other much older issues like racial reconciliation and foreign intervention that have been discussed in this country since it was a country. A platform to get a primary source centric resource to view those things and hear what the people said and read what they wrote and talk to others and hear people like Mark and myself debate in good faith about what direction the country should take or what policies should be adopted in order to address certain issues. That's what, in the end, is going to help things. For no matter how extreme you are on either the right or the left, we all want things to get better, and it's not going to get better in any appreciable way. Certainly not without sectarian violence, unless we have platforms like this and unless people participate in them. So participate in them for the good of your community and for the good of the nation.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to do more of these debates, and it doesn't just have to be between Evan and I. So anyone in the audience, if you would like to debate us on issues, civic or political or economic or otherwise, we would be more than happy to host this debate um, with you as well. So it doesn't just have to be Evan and I every time. It could be other people as well. And I'd love to have other people on our board, like Mindy, to participate in these debates as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I thought I had fun. And I'd like to do this again soon.
Yeah, likewise.
All right. Well, this will conclude our debate, our first debate in this new series of debates. We have done some debates in the past, but that was a couple years ago now. And so,
I'm
new
pretty sure we
series of
debated on
debates.
this issue as well.
Oh yeah.
And I hope that nobody here remembers that debate because I do not think I represented the issue very well when we had that debate a couple years back.
Yeah, I mean the audio was also worse. I think you were outside walking while you were doing
Yeah.
the debate or
Yep.
something like that. So yeah, this series is gonna have better quality audio and visuals and everything. And now we have the the banners going around
Mm-hmm.
on the screen. And if we do this more often, then I'm definitely gonna pay for the full paid version of StreamYard so I can add even more stuff to make the, the debates more engaging and visually, I guess, interactive. But yeah, well, thank you for your time here today, and thank you to the audience for watching. And I hope you learned some new pointers on either if you're for the motion or against the motion. You can learn new stuff from us on our website as well as All American History. And so I encourage you to go to www.tarpeia.us. And it's best viewed on desktop, by the way. The mobile version is still being developed, or at least the formatting looks different. So go to desktop, go to our website, check out our resources. They're free anyway, so you're learning for free. I don't know why anyone would have a problem with that. And we hope to see you in the next debate, probably a month from now. So, bye bye.
Yep. All right, Mark. I have some laundry I need to do, so I've got to go.